Fantastic. Great. Well, I'm grateful to be here. It's always a privilege to come on this platform and share not just good news, but it's the best news ever, right? And it really is. My sobriety date's April 7th, 1987. My home group's here in St. Louis, Missouri. It's called AA on the Rocks. It's a strong three legacy group. Um, and it meets on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. If you're ever in St. Louis, please look us up, and we'd love to host you. And if we get a hold of you quick enough, we will put you to work. We will get some mileage out of your sobriety, I can promise you. And if you're coming to the big dance, in 2030, which will be right here in our hometown, which we hope you do, if you do come to that, plan on coming in a day early on Wednesday night, because A on the Rocks and other groups in the St. Louis area will be hosting a pre-party party. I don't know what all that looks like yet. I can just guarantee it will happen. And we'd love for you to come in early and be a part of that as well. But I'm grateful to be here. I come from a great line of sponsorship, a strong sponsor, a three legacy sponsor, a three legacy home group. All those are things that have made a big difference in how my life turns out. So I just want to make sure I share that. And of course, Alice and the team here for this platform, thank you for the invitation, and I love all of you, and it's a privilege to be here. It was read tonight on page, the bottom of page 98 and over to the top of page 99 to 12 and 12. But anytime you're extracting any kind of text from anything you're reading, I think it's always important to read the paragraph before and the paragraph after, at least, to bring total context to what you read. I'm not going to read that for you, but I would just encourage you to, at least go over that and browse that and observe that. So this paragraph takes on its own meaning for you personally, maybe at a deeper level. But I'm going to speak specifically with the time that I have about what we read tonight. And I can tell you this right off the bat. I didn't come to AA because I believed in God, or I believed in a higher power. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous because I was out of ideas, bottom line. That's why I got here. I wasn't planning on staying here. I went back to a treatment center in 1987, in the same space and town, different name that I was at in 1980, 7 years later. And I went back there because of the demonstration AA gave me back in 1980. I only stayed for 30 days and I was gone. I had no intentions of staying. I did my time, and I was intoxicated immediately and would continue on 7 more years and burn my life completely to the ground. And I surrendered one more time in a jail cell, and through that surrender brought me back to that treatment center, and I started my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't, again, come to AA because I believed in God or I wanted this deep spiritual life. It was the furthest thing from my mind. I wasn't planning on being AA forever. I didn't even know what that meant. I went to that treatment center, one, because it was familiar, number two, because I was in a lot of trouble. And I needed a piece of paper to stand in front of the judge. I was facing a parole violation and 2 more felony convictions and on my way back to the penitentiary. That was my motivation for going to treatment, to be very transparent. And through that, I got introduced to recovery in a way that I never knew possible, and I wasn't looking for it. But that's how I came to AA. And I came to AA, very beat up, just like everybody else, very not understanding what the root of the problem was, which is separation, spiritual separation. If you're a person of faith, I would call it spiritual separation. If you're a person of reason, then just call it separation. Whatever makes the world go around on its axis, whatever makes leaves turn green and the leaves fall from the trees and the seasons change from one season to the next, whatever powers behind all that, I wasn't connected with it. I was separated from it. And I think our literature argues that. And I think I would argue that, no doubt, from my own experience. And all I can share is what I've seen, what I've heard, and what I've experienced. And that's all I have to share with you. But that's, so that's really the root of the problem. The drinking was more of a solution than it was a problem. Obviously, it was problematic drinking King alcohol. But once it was separated from me and I was no longer intoxicated, I still suffered. And I suffered tremendously. The care, boredom, and worry in my life was on steroids. The irritable, restless, discontent disposition that we talk so much about, the alcoholic mind state, it was just intensified. And so I was still lost and very much alone, very much separated, even though I was separated from King alcohol, not understanding what the problem was, with the delusion that after I put down King alcohol, that somehow or another my life would just start to morph into what your life looked like, or at least a lot of people around recovery. And of course, if you take physical alcohol out of your life, you're going to get better physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. It's just a given. It's just a science of it. But it only goes so far. And then the root of the problem that just rises up, and there it is separation. And what does that even mean? It wasn't even language I knew anything about when I got here. And so that's how I started out. But I want to back up and we're talking about faith. We're talking about a belief in a higher power. And I think it's always important to go back and look at one's own life and where did you come from? How were you shaped spiritually? Or if you're a secular person or a person of reason or agnostic or claim to be an atheist, how did that come about? How did that get shaped? You just didn't wake up one day and say, this is my position. It was shaped by your culture, either inside your house, inside your neighborhood, inside your school, or a combination thereof. You have this worldview, this way you look at life, this lens, if you would, how you see life, whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God, whatever, you have it. And you didn't just come up with it on your own. It was very much given to you, a big part of it. And so much of it comes from a subconscious space. So it's not even at a conscious level what it is I do. But I can just tell you I was raised by a single mom who was the greatest mom on the planet as far as I'm concerned, my mother, Mama Long, and she's long been gone. But she was the only parent I ever had. My dad was an alcoholic, and she ran him off when I was just 2 or 3. He later took his life. That's how my dad quit drinking at age 54. He was not a part of my life. I only saw him a handful of times. Matter of fact, the last time I saw my dad alive was the first time I was ever sentenced. And he came to where I was living and went to the trial and watched me get sentenced. That was the last time I saw my dad alive. So that was a very fractured relationship. But I had my mother, and my mother was everything. And my mother had a hard life. She was married to 2 different alcoholics, ended up at a state mental institution on the Kansas-Oklahoma border for a great deal of time, got out, met my dad, and the circus started again. She married him, had me, but then she was just done. She had her own surrender with that life, alcohol, all of it. I'm just done living that life. And she had no resources. Her parents died very young. She had, no aunts, no uncles, no siblings. It was just her, a divorced woman twice in the 60s, no education. That's a tough resume to try to go live off. But she pulled it off. But what she did do is she surrendered her will in life over to the care of God as she understood God, which was her Catholic roots. And she did that, and she never wavered on it until the day she died in 2015. And over the decades, my mom blossomed into an incredibly beautiful woman. And if you've heard me speak before, you probably heard me say before that there's nothing more beautiful than a woman who's walked with God for a long time. And part of that's biased because I'm a mama's boy, but it's just true. I'm around we've got a lot of amazing godly women on this platform tonight. You met some of them, they were introduced to you, that are incredible people, and I love spending time with those people. And they influenced me in so many ways. But my mom was a huge person. And what she wanted me to do, all my mom wanted me to know was, number one, she loved me, and number two, there was a power greater than myself. And that was the God that she understood, which was this Jesus-looking God. And she wanted me to have a relationship with this Jesus-looking God and live this Jesus-centered life. So she put me into a parochial school, and she robbed from Peter and wrote a bad check to Paul to get me in there. She didn't have any resources, but I went from kindergarten until about the 4th grade. And I had to go to mass every day, pretty much except for, maybe Saturday. But I was in mass every day, and I'm not one of these people that get on and they have their own experience. But I'm saying I'm not one of these recovering Catholics or somebody who experienced church hurt or had a real run-in with the church. There's a lot of people that have had that experience. That just wasn't mine. I know I love church enough that I would come home and play church. And some of you might be in that space. You might have done that yourself. I used to come home and put TV trays together for an altar and throw a cool Afghan over the top of them and dump the fruit out in the fruit bowl and fill it full of potato chips with the Eucharist. And for the Eucharist, I'd use potato chips, and I'd dump get something with some grape Kool-Aid into it for the wine, and get a towel out of the closet for a cheap stole, and get a Bible out we never read, but I'd get it out. And I'd have, we'd have mass at the Holy House of Long and Worship, whatever you want to call it, save a few souls. It was a great day. This is how I'm starting out in life. It's the 60s. We're going into the 70s now. Jesus Revolution is full blast. Peace, love movement's going on. All the rock operas are out. Tommy, Godspell, Hair, Jesus Christ Superstar. All of them with a spiritual momentum behind them and a spiritual rhythm and articulation, if you would, to their music, to everything they did. And I could sing all those rock operas still today. If you put them in, I know them by heart. played a lot of them in different bands. But all that was what was shaping my life, long before I met King Alcohol, whether I liked it or I didn't like it. But even with all that information, and that's what a lot of it was information, and it was an experience for sure, but it didn't penetrate this soul. And I would identify the soul as our mind, our will, and our emotions. And I was very much separated long before I ever met King Alcohol. It just didn't really start to form itself and come up really alive until I got a little bit older, closer to being a teenager, 10, 11, 12, in that age where the manifestation of the separation really started to show itself. But that's how I started out in life. I was on fire for whatever spiritual experience I was having at that time. I love music. I love sports. But through a series of changes, my mom dropped a bomb on us and said, "Hey, we're moving to St. Louis." And I came to St. Louis in when I was right around 7 or 8 years old, and my life changed. Everything about my life changed. My mom, told me, pulled the blinds back and introduced me to a brother and two sisters I didn't even know existed from her previous marriage, that were about 10 years older than I was. And so that was a shock. And now she's trying to make her own amends and reconcile her own life with these kids, and little by little. But it's, I was no longer in a parochial school. I was thrown into a public school system, in a school with maybe 100 kids, now to a school with thousands of kids. And this is where I can go back in my life and really see how spiritual, this separation I'm talking about, really started to stretch me and really started to burn into my mind, and how I perceived the world, how I perceived you, how I thought you perceived me, and what you thought of me paralyzed me. It absolutely owned my life. And just little by little, that separation pushed me further from anything of my upbringing, any of the teaching, any of the understanding, any desire to want to live that way or do that. The world really pulled on me like a magnet. And then along come the dark side of life: tobacco, sex, drugs, going down the line, and eventually booze. And none of that church or mass or teaching or rock operas or any of those things were able to take away the care, boredom, and worry in my life. That was owning me at this point in time. They just owned the title to my soul. And when I got intoxicated, when I drank the magic juice for the first time, really drank it and got intoxicated, it changed my life. And I surrendered my will and my life over to that understanding immediately. And I was hell bent to do it for the rest of my life. And I set out to do that. I turned my life over to it. And I was willing to go to any length to give it, to live it, to experience it again and again and again at a very pricely cost. And you all know what that cost is. And for most people, unfortunately, it's death. I didn't experience that, but I hurt a lot of people. I burned a lot of bridges, and I destroyed a lot of lives, and broke a lot of hearts along the way, and include my own. And I ended up here at Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I came into the rooms and I saw the steps and I saw the language about God, I've been so separated from God for so long. And so much of my challenges with God or a higher power were very much at a subconscious level. I wouldn't even been able to articulate what my hangups were until I stayed around here long enough to be able to form language and hear people share in meetings. And all of a sudden I start to have a little bit of a library, a point of reference to be able to put words with some of my crazy thoughts and ideas and resentments and questions and my doubts and all those things that we come here with. And I just want to say this up front, and I'll probably close with something similar, but this platform, this fellowship, this life that we get to live in Alcoholics Anonymous, where we have this third tradition that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. That's it. You come as you are, wherever you are, and understanding today that broken people come to AA. Well, people don't come here. Broken people come here. And broken people do broken things that hurt people. And so this is what shows up, and it continues to show up and will always continue to show up. Well, that's how I showed up. But the beautiful part is that we welcome that unconditionally. This agape love that we have here is one of the most powerful things. If you want to use biblical terms, this kingdom of God, this kingdom of God that you hear so much about most of the time in past tense language, a lot of times in philosophical religious circles, this kind of like this dream lifestyle. We would call it the world of the Spirit. You've now entered the world of the Spirit. We got the fellowship of the Spirit. We're familiar with this language, but it really is the case because when you come here, We don't care who you are, what you did, what your gender is, what your sexuality is, who you voted for, how much money you owe or you don't owe. We don't care. If you have a sincere desire to not burn your life to the ground with alcohol and to overcome your alcoholism, then welcome home. But with that comes so much more. And with that comes that you walk in here with whatever level of faith you have. And you have faith. You could sit there and say, well, I don't believe in God, so that means I don't have faith. No, that's a faith system. That's a belief system in itself is a belief system. So you can't really hang on to that. But I came with all kinds of doubts and questions and twisted perceptions. And, I came from the correctional world. And I can promise you still today, if we walk into a Department of Corrections anywhere in the world, but if I took you to the prison I go to every week and walk in and say, pick a housing unit, and we picked one, I said, just go pick out 100 guys. I don't care what their age is. I don't care what their ethnic background is. I don't care. Just pick 100 of them and bring them down here to the visiting hall or to the chow hall or wherever we're going to meet, the fellowship room. And you bring them in. I could tell you 3 things about every one of those guys, and I would be almost 100% accurate. And here's those 3 things. Number 1, their relationship with their earthly father, heavily compromised, if they ever had one at all. I mean, whether it's abuse, absenteeism, for example, you can pick it. It's there. I can promise you. Number 2, their educational skills, reading, writing, comprehension, below par. Are some of them higher than that? Some of them have some college degrees. Yeah, a few exceptions, but for the most part, under par. But the one place that I'll give you 100% on is that their relationship with God, twisted at best, or a higher power at best. And that's a common denominator in all that. And I was that guy when I got here. I was heavily broken and heavily separated. And so I came to Alcoholics Anonymous just like this what we read tonight. So I'll just kind of go through this a little bit and pick out some different lines from the book, some different sayings, and just kind of unpack it from the way I understand it. And wherever you're at on your spiritual journey. And here's what I'll just lay out right now. Whether you say there's a God or you say there isn't a God, neither one of you can prove it. I'll just lay that out there. You can't prove it. You can make some strong arguments, but none of it's airtight. It's all going to come down to faith. There is a God, there isn't a God. There is a higher power, there isn't a higher power. But I think what our book allows us to do is work through that. The fellowship allows us to work through it. Come with your doubts, come with your questions, come with your agnosticism, come with your atheism, come with your self-righteousness or your religious hierarchy or this huge intellectual background you have with theology or whatever. Come with it all. Bring it. And come to this space and learn how to love people for just who they are. And not based on anything else. And I don't know of any place on the planet that does that. It's the most spiritual place you could ever go to. And so if you're new here, welcome home. And you really are a part of something that's pretty amazing. If you come all the way in, sit all the way down and staying is always the hardest part here. But if you stay, all this stuff that we're talking about, you'll unpack it and you'll work through it and you'll just come to fruition. So God bless you as you do. But one of the lines in there is that the world doesn't like a place where God is in charge. That theme is in that. And that was one of my things. You look around the world, you see accidents, you see sickness, you see cruelty, injustice, unfortunate births, all kinds of things. And a lot of people reject God, reject prayer because they're not arrogant, but they're hurt and they're confused, right? And that's what I was. I was hurt because I never grew up without a dad. My mom was never around, grew up on the streets. I was a band member. I hung around people much older than I was, older teens, people in their 20s, 30s. And I suffered all the abuse before I was old enough to drive a car. Physical, mental, spiritual, sexual, pick it. All of it. And so I was all kinds of confused and hurt when I got here. I was all jacked up when I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Some of us didn't become skeptics in classrooms. We became skeptics in hospital waiting rooms. When you're sitting around and looking at all the injustice in the world and people, why is this person suffering? And why does this person have to die so young? And why is this? And why is that? And all these things, all these atrocities you see going on. And it's been going on since the beginning of time. If your life has been brutal, prayer can often, I think, sometimes feel like a really cruel joke when somebody says, pray. Yeah, right. Pray. You want me to pray to this God and this God that allowed me to go through life the way I went through life? Come on, man. Give me a break. And you may not be able to say that out loud, but again, at this subconscious level, it can be very much what's going on in your life. Unhappy lives, that feeling of being cheated. I definitely fell into that category. And many of us carry deep disbelief because I didn't get whatever people got. My mom never had any money. I always had hand-me-down clothes, hand-me-down everything, hand-me-down bicycles, hand-me-down lawnmowers, hand-me-down cars, hand-me-down drum equipment. My first set of drums, I had a blue sparkled bass drum with cheetah tom-toms and a trash can at one point for one of my cymbals, a trash can lid. But he didn't have stuff. And of course, it caused a lot of rage and bitterness and eventually, turned to self-medication with King Alcohol. But it's just, it kind of feels like two runners. One, you're both at the starting, you're both going to be in a race. One gets to start 50 yards ahead of you, and you're 50 yards behind with a backpack of bricks on you. And then someone says, hey, run harder, run faster, try harder. And some of us aren't just bad people, man. We're just tired people. You're wore out when you get here. And you're wanting something materialistic, something tangible you can put your arms on. You're saying, well, yeah, it's really not. When you put the spiritual head of the material straight now. Okay, whatever. Whatever. Because my mindset when I got here, call me crazy. But I think I could be a little bit more spiritual if I had a few $100s in my pocket. Call me nuts. And a better looking girl, and a legal driver's license, and a car that wasn't held together by bumper stickers. That was my mindset. Why? Because I was shaped by the culture. Materialism, consumerism, secularism, going down the line. This has all shaped me. Whether I wanted it to or not, it did. And it still does. It still has an impact on my life today. If I'm transparent and I'm honest about it, these things can still pull on me and take precedent over anything spiritual going on in my life. I can still get lost in the world system pretty fast. And if there is no justice, this is a big one for me, therefore there's no God. This AA acknowledges this logic. It does in this reading. If you read this all the way through, and then if you read the big book portion, it doesn't call it stupid. It just calls it being human. You're just a human being having a human experience, and this is how we reply. It also implies, though, which I love, your pain is real, but your conclusion may not be the whole story. And if you're here tonight, that's what I would challenge. I don't want to dismiss your hurt. The injustice you face. Some of you have suffered tremendously here. There's some horrific stories here. Way more horrific than mine. I mean, seriously, bad stuff. But you just got to stick around. I don't know if any of you have had children that have had surgery. I got 5 kids, but my girls, when they're young, a child in surgery, the child thinks the doctor's going to harm him. The nurse is going to harm him. What are you doing? Get away from me. Don't touch me. Don't put those needles in me. Get away from me. They can't comprehend the purpose because they don't have the full frame, right? They don't have all the information. And so you have to sit there and try to help them understand, have faith. You got to trust this process. You're going to feel better on the back end. But they don't understand it, so therefore it freaks them out. Well, the same thing happens with this whole higher power thing. I don't understand it, so therefore I'm threatened by it. Not understanding is not the same as having proof. It's not. And so when we say turn your will and life over to the care of God of your understanding, and Bill Wilson, if you read The Best of Bill and you read the section on faith, the very first paragraph, he would say, and I'm paraphrasing, that statement, we turn our will and life over to the care of God as we understood God, is probably the most important language in the entire AA vocabulary. Pretty powerful. And so this understanding, but the understanding will grow. And it may even shrink, and then it'll grow again, then it'll shrink, and you'll be challenged, and you'll have doubts, and you'll have questions, and things will happen, and you won't understand, you're confused by it. Whatever. And your self-centeredness will definitely enter your prayer life. It will definitely enter your spiritual life. And you can be very self-centered trying to be spiritual, trust me. And probably don't have enough time to unpack that, but I could go on that all day. But we sympathize. This isn't one of the most underrated lines, I think. A doesn't start by arguing. It starts by saying we get it. And we do. Wherever you're at on your journey, we just get it. That's what the fellowship does, I think, around step 11. It's before we believe in God, we borrow our belief from the room, right? And this is what it says. Many of you had faith in your home groups. You believed in your home groups. Well, that's exactly what happened. You could easily summarize it this way. I believe God saved me in a cell. He introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous, and Alcoholics Anonymous introduced me back to God, And that was a process, and it's still a process in the making. I didn't come to AA because I believed, as I had started out with. I came because I was out of options, right? That's why I came here. Some still cling. They use that language. Some still cling. We read that right here in that paragraph. Some of us still cling to A as a higher power. Well, I still cling to A as my higher power in a lot of ways. This is why I come to meetings. This is why I love coming on stuff like this. I get to hear wisdom. I get to hear experience, strength, and hope. That gives me inspiration, motivation, and encouragement. It stretches me. It challenges me. It holds me in contempt. All kinds of things happen when that's going on. So I grow by being around you. And as Mother Teresa beautifully said, you got to remain green. Why? Because green things are growing. Well, if you're going to remain green, you got to be around fertile soil. What is fertile soil? Going to solid meetings with solid people, hanging around solid people, going the same direction you want to go. All those things still very much are how I experience God today. I experience God with skin on, and I'm looking at a lot of people that influence me today. So for the newcomer, the Gnostic, that's allowed. Hanging on to your higher power is your group, GOD, Good Orderly Direction, group of drunks. You know, there's lots of acrostics and acronyms for lots of spiritual words we have. But it's basically AA saying, start where you are. You know, just know that this power we're talking about doesn't want to leave you there. You know, but start where you're at with all your hurts, with all your habits, with all your hang-ups, with all your doubts, with all your questions. Come as you are. A person drowning doesn't need a theology degree, right? They need a hand. They need a life preserver. They need a raft. Get me out of this. They don't care about all that stuff. If all you can believe in tonight in this room and what we're sharing and the people that are in it, well, let's start there. That's enough. I mean, I'm telling you, it's all you need to make a beginning here. Let the group be your higher power until you can find your own. What a beautiful invitation. And that's true. Where else does that exist other than right here? It's the most kingdom of God space that I know of. You know, prayer may still not be, it still may be very unconvincing, and it also may be very quite objectionable. Yeah, I didn't pray when I got here. It was easy to sit in a room and say the Serenity Prayer, or hold hands and say the Lord's Prayer, or the 7-step prayer, or the 3rd-step prayer. And that was my introduction to prayer life, really. My only prayer life prior to that, prior to coming out of that Catholic school, was the good old plea bargain foxhole prayers. And you know how that went. God, and it started almost immediately because drinking was very problematic from the beginning. And it's pretty much from the beginning. It was like, God, if you get me out of this, I will never do it again. I mean, we've all said some version of that prayer. And if you're really alcoholic, you had to add this to it. And this time, I really mean it, because you burnt that prayer to the ground, right? I mean, you just wear that stuff out. But when you come here, prayer might be very unconvincing. I remember hearing a story. Well, it wasn't a story. It was a true story about a woman that was in a meeting one day, and she was giving glory to her higher power for answering prayer. And some skeptic in the meeting goes, hey, how do you know it was God that answered your prayer? And she said, because he's the only one I asked. He's the only one I asked about it. He's the only one that knew about it. So that's where he's getting all the kudos and all the love. So some people just don't just doubt their prayer, don't just doubt the power of it, but they're offended by it. Because prayer can sound like a form of denial, superstition, or even manipulation. And it can be. Sometimes prayer can even be a form of gossip. You know, well, we need to pray for so-and-so because so-and-so, and then we blah, blah, blah. We can use it as gossip. But it's really more of a personal thing than it is anything. Because what you're doing when nobody else is looking is really the best gauge of where you're at spiritually, period. There's no doubt about it. You know, what are you doing when nobody else is around? Prayer felt like people telling me to think positive when I was on fire. You know, that's what it felt like. You know, when your life's on fire, you're burning your life to the ground, people are saying, well, man, just pray. You just need to pray. Yeah, I'm on fire, dude. I need some water. I need to jump off this bridge. I need this thing to end. I didn't hate God. I hate how God was used. And this is where a lot of people experience church hurt. You just need to go to church. You just need to read the Bible. You need to hang around different people. Blah, 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 blah. All those things that we get lost in. Well, I struggle with all those same things. Something deep inside us, it tells us something deep inside us kept rebelling. And what is that all about? And I think that's all those things that I'm talking about. It's a culmination of all those things. This is huge. The reading admits that resistance isn't always intellectual. It's emotional, and it's definitely willful. And if you think about being a soul sickness, and I would define soul, this is me, Harold, talking. The way I would define the soul is our mind, our will, and our emotions. And if you take any one of those three by itself and inventory it, it's very fractured. This fractured self is what I suffer from immensely. A wild horse, just think about a wild horse. It's not trained. not tamed, reacting to any saddle, right? The horse isn't evil. It's just afraid and it doesn't trust the process. Well, think of yourself that way. You're not, or a newcomer who's struggling to take your suggestions or take your ideas or live into this thing. And it's just, it's like a wild horse and you're trying to put a saddle on it. You're trying to give it a principled life and it doesn't trust you and it's afraid of a principled life, and that's very much true. So my problem wasn't God. My problem was surrender. I wasn't surrendered enough. And there's three types of people that come to AA. There's those who make it happen. There's those who watch it happen, and there's those who don't know what's happening at all. And I've been all three of those cats. You know that? I've been all three of those guys when I got here. And so I have to understand that and give people space to do what they do. Bowing before any God, that idea, bowing before God. A lot of alcoholics struggle with this belief. They struggle with authority. I struggle with authority. I didn't even want a sponsor. I didn't get a sponsor until I was 3 years sober because I already had a probation and parole officer my entire life since I was 10 years old. 11. And I still have one at this given moment. I'm sitting in the rooms. I got a parole officer. You happen to get slip signed, do better letters, I call them. And then you want me to voluntarily walk up, hey, will you be my sponsor and tell me what to do and have say so in my life? I don't think so. I didn't want any authority in my life. I want to do what I want, when I want, how I want, the way I want. If you don't like it, pound salt. I don't know what to tell you, but just get out of my way. And I lacked surrender. I was surrendered to King Alcohol, but I hadn't surrendered to this idea, this design for living a spiritual way of life for sure. It's just a struggle because authority had abused him. I have been struggled with authority my whole life, or because self is their God, because you worship yourself. Well, there you go. I didn't want a God. I wanted a consultant. As the book would say, I wanted a bush league pinch hitter. I wanted somebody to come in and close out the game. If I started to load the bases with nobody out, God, can you come in and get me out of this jam? I want a guy to co-sign my plans, not correct them. That was my self-centered, how it still can creep in today very much in my spiritual life. And many of us had strong logic too. I didn't have a lot of strong logic, but there is a lot of smart people that show up here. Most people that fall under this atheistic mindset are people that are very smart, very intellectual, right? And they saying, yes, we are smart. We had arguments. We had proofs. We had experience. But all we're saying, none of that stuff kept us sober. None of those smarts, none of all that information kept us sober. Look at Dr. Bob's story. Look at alcohol number 3, Bill Dotson. All these guys you see, they were all really smart people. Bill Wilson himself. A person could be so brilliant and still be powerless over alcohol and die from alcoholism. My logic wasn't undefeated. My life was still unmanageable. That was what was going on, right? A strong bridge was step 11. Prayer isn't a debate. It's a practice. It truly is a practice. And it's not, step 11 is not think your way into faith. It's practice your way into humility, and doing it privately, personally. What are you reading? What are you listening to? What are you studying? Who are you around? I was told early on, there's 3 things that are important. Number 1, who you're around. Number 2, is it okay? And number 2, who you're around, what's it doing to me? Number 3, what is it okay to be around these people? So I had to start taking ownership for my life. You don't understand exercise by thinking about it. You understand it by doing it, right? And that's the same way with the steps in the program. I didn't pray because I believed. I prayed because I needed help. And I didn't have any other direction. And through that prayer, it changed my life. And I'll wrap up with these couple statements. Good, and I think it's just a newcomer-friendly way to say it. If prayer feels weird, good. That means you're trying something new. You're being stressed. Amen? Because every alcoholic prays eventually, just not to God at first. We pray to alcohol. We pray to relief. We pray to numbness. We give our life over to it. I was already praying. I should know I was praying to a bottle, to a way of life, to a lifestyle. I didn't know I'd turn my will and life over to all that, any of that. So AA doesn't demand you understand God. It invites you to stop playing God. If my buddy Peter would say, probably the first words God would say to him when he got to heaven were, hey, get out of my chair. It's that very self-centered way of still after 38 years of being here, wanting to run my own life at times and doing so in a very hard line. So if you're new and your heart is still rebelling, you're not disqualified. You're actually who this whole thing is written for and what this whole program is about. So welcome home. Come with your doubts. Come with your questions. Thank you for allowing me to share where I've been and where I've come from. I hope that some of that helped you and blessed you in some way. Thank you for my life, and that's all I got.
And what is it that you do when life gets busy and chaotic? How do you find time for peace and quiet?
Well, I think that's just something that changes over time. Your prayer life will evolve. Like I said, mine started out with the basic prayers that we share in unison here in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I can remember when I really started to morph into my own kind of prayer life, private life, and how that, and it was kind of funny how that happened. But my very first hunting season, when I had some rights to go hunting again, and I went with my buddy Benny, and Benny was just maybe a year and a half ahead of me in sobriety, and we went and we stayed in this. The guy said you could stay in this room. There's 2 beds in the same room, so it was almost like being in a cell block. And there was one bed on one side and me on the other side. But we put all our gear down. We're going to go to bed. We shut off the lights and we climb into bed. Well, I had my routine, which gave me peace, which was I get down and pray. Well, I never got down and really prayed with anybody. And I was having this whole battle between my mind. This narrative was just going crazy because this guy is in my room and he's invading my space. And little did I know that he was having the same battle between his ears. But you could have heard a pin drop in that room. There was dead silence. And I don't know how long it went on, but finally, out of nowhere in the pitch black, he hollers from his side of the room, "Screw you, I'm praying." And I said, "What?" He goes, "Screw you, I'm praying. Mom, I've been over here this whole time worried about you, thinking about me. If I pray, I'm praying. And I'm getting on my knees and praying if you don't like it." And he's got this whole thing built up towards me, and I haven't even done anything. And I said, "Hey, can I pray with you?" He goes, "Yeah, you come over here and pray with me." And I prayed with him. And that was a huge step for me in my prayer life. And I could give you lots of those examples. But for me, I just, no big book, no breakfast, no Bible, no coffee, no daily reflection, no whatever. I start my day very intentional with getting into some kind of spiritual literature to shape my attitude, shape my forethought. And that gives me a lot of peace. And at night, I do a nightly review, the 10th and 11th step practice on page 86 of our literature. I have that. There's people on this call right now I share that nightly review with every night. They share theirs with me. I get tons of these every day. But how that, part of the questions that I end my inventory with for the day is, what am I grateful for? I've never met anybody who ever got drunk who had a grateful heart. Not one person who was full of gratitude. So I try to go, no matter how chaotic my day is, I don't list everything I'm grateful for, but at least 1 or 2 or 3 things that I'm grateful for this day. Could be my bride, could be my dog, could be my community sponsees, whatever. So those are the things, John, and I'm responsible for that. Nobody else is responsible for that. Just, making sure that, garbage in, garbage out. Spiritual stuff in, probably some spiritual stuff out. So I'm responsible what goes in and comes out. So hopefully that helps.
And that was beautiful, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Jackie, come on in. Let's hear what you got to ask. Oh, I lost you. I got to find you, and then I can unmute you. Sorry.
Okay, now am I unmuted? You just can't shut me up. That's all there is to that. Anyway, my name is Jackie and I am an alcoholic. And thank you, Harold, for your message tonight. So many things you said just really melt my heart or resonate. But there was one thing you said, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about it. And I think you said it even twice. You said something like my soul is my mind, my will, and my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, what does that mean?
Well, that's a fair question. And, sometimes we hear lots of songs written about the soul, things written about the soul. C.S. Lewis, a great theologian, would say, you don't have a soul, you are a soul. I mean, there's lots of theology and philosophy around what does it mean to have a soul. But just my understanding of unpacking, theology and spiritual literature in 38 years is, defining that. What does that really mean? And if we're talking about something that we're separated from, that's not physically with me, that I think moves on or can move on, is definitely our will and our mind and our emotions. It's not it's just a part of me that it's on its own little axis, if you would. And that's what I would define as a soul. And when you think about the soul sickness, when you think about your mind, well, the book would say the problem centers in the mind. But you think about your rebellious will, well, we talked about that tonight. And then you talk about our emotions, and our book has lots of things to say about that. We even have topics like emotional sobriety, in the Great Frontier, in the Great Grapevine letter that Bill Wilson wrote around emotional sobriety. So you just think about those three categories and then put that in the context of, calling it something, the soul, what makes up a person. I think it's really easy to say that we suffer from a soul sickness, and that we suffered a long time and we've been separated. So it's that separation and the blockage at the same time that's kept the sunlight of the Spirit shining in on our soul. And so we do this real heavy work in steps 4 through 9, which removes. It's all about removal. Using a Buddhist term, it's about subtraction rather than addition. That's very much a Buddhist term. But you can just imagine that this is the channel between me and this power, and it's been blocked long before I ever drank. But through this process of removal, the sunlight of the Spirit finally starts to shine in our soul, and we start to heal. The soul sickness starts to heal. And page 75 of our Bib book really lays that out when it says that once we've shared, I'm paraphrasing, but once we've shared our entire life story with another human being, we've really cleaned house. It's when most of us would say, I'm no longer having a spiritual awakening. I had a real spiritual experience. Why? Because your soul was probably touched by the sunlight of the Spirit, maybe for the first time in your entire life. And it's a game changer. It's just like the magic of King Alcohol. The magic of this power's touch is pretty profound. And so that's what I would say, if that's helpful at all.
Thank you, Harold. Thanks, Jackie, for the question. Marissa, come on in. You haven't asked a question in a bit. It's good to see you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa May, and I'm an alcoholic. Thank you so much, Harold, for your sharing with us tonight. And you mentioned kind of at the end of your share, fertile soil, that things that are green need to be in fertile soil. What are your practices, or how do you ensure that you're staying in that fertile soil? And what do you do if you find that maybe it's not being as nourishing as you originally thought?
Well, that's a great question, Marissa. And I spend a lot of time in the Department of Corrections and Treatment Centers every week and work with a lot of new people all the time. And so that's always a question. It's another question. Why does this person get sober, this person get sober? Why is there such a low percentage of people that actually ever get this thing? Out of the millions of alcoholics in the world, why is there only a couple, 2 or 3 million at all in recovery? Why? And it isn't because of the opportunity, but what is it? And so if you just visualize a seed, we'll call it the seed of grace. We're all given the seed of grace. And most people will never experience it at the level we're experiencing, but you're given this seed of grace. Here's your opportunity. This is your chance to really live again. And most of us will throw it out the window. We'll chew it up, spit it out, swallow it, put it in our pocket, let it grow lint, wash it in the wash machine. We'll never really take that seed and plant it in fertile soil. And so we tell a newcomer, hey, you're going to have to come all the way in, sit all the way down and stay. You're going to need to get a sponsor. You're going to need to get work the steps. You're going to need a home group. You're going to need a service commitment. That's fertile soil in the beginning. It's very much fertile soil for the rest of our lives. But in the beginning, if you want this seed of grace to really blossom, you're going to have to plant it in fertile soil. Broken people do broken things. Hurt people hurt people. Well, people don't show up here. There's meetings that you can pay me to go to. I hear people say, I've never been to an bad AA meeting. I've been to plenty of meetings you could never pay me to go back to. So, but it's to be expected because we're in a broken space. But I want to be around healthy people that are going the right way. And when and again, I didn't hang around those people in the beginning. I was one of the ones you go, hey, stay away from that guy. I was that guy in the beginning. Hopefully I'm not that guy anymore, but I was definitely that guy in the beginning. So who I'm around is my responsibility. That's the fertile soil. What am I reading? What am I listening to? What am I doing? Who am I investing my time with? I didn't have anybody I could call when I got here. That was the honest to God truth. When I was arrested, I couldn't even call my mom. I'd been so separated from her for years. There was nobody I could call. Today, and no exaggeration with this right here, if I needed 100 people to be at my house by 10 o'clock tonight, that would not be a hard thing to do. That's just how full my life is. And so the soil is deep all around me, but I'm responsible for that. And does that mean throughout your stage, we teach in the beginning, you're going to probably have to change the people, places, and things in your life when you get here, if you really want to grow in this thing. But that sometimes happens even in different stages of your sobriety. You look around, what's this doing to me? Are these people really going the way I want to go? So you may have to change people, places, and things a little bit and shift a little bit as you stay here to keep that soil fertile. And like I said, going back to Mother Teresa's quote, you got to remain green. Why? Because green things are growing. So I'm responsible for the greenness in the fertile soil that I plant myself in. I'm responsible. So that's what I would say to that, Marissa.
Great question, Marissa, and thank you, Harold. And I'm gonna break my heart 3 times, and I'm gonna let Allison close this out because we don't have enough time for y'all. I'm so sorry.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Harold. Allison, alcoholic. Loved your message today. Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask you about clearly your understanding and growth around a relationship with the power greater than yourself is evidenced in your share tonight. How has that journey changed and affected your relationships with others?
It's a great question. I mean, I think when we get here, we live such an outside in life. That's been our hang up our whole life. And now we're taught to live an inside out life. And that process is definitely a process, and it varies, and it always materializes if you work for it. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, right? So I mean, it's just a process. It's always in motion and moves at different stretches. But it's really that coming to the end of yourself is really what has to happen. You have to come to the end of yourself. And for some people that happens the day they come to AA. I mean, they're just done. They're done with their old life and they just want a new life and they're willing. But for me, I was done with King Alcohol and the consequences, but I wasn't done running my life. And so I had to just sit here and suffer in recovery till I came to the end of myself. And luckily enough, I stayed. I was 3 years into this thing before I really came all the way into it. But when I did, it changed my life. And those 3rd step prayer promises started to happen on the top of page 63. And I became less and less interested in myself, my little plans, my little designs. And I became more and more interested in what I can contribute to the world. And so that shift, that going from a taker to a giver, that's the shift that has to happen. You have to learn to live in recovery and visit the world, not live in the world and visit recovery. However you want to say that shift is what had to happen. So over time, that's just where I live today. I've tried, of course, I'm still selfish. Self will never be fully eradicated, but I'm trying to live for a power greater than myself's ambitions, not my own. And that really comes down to, and a program sets it up beautifully, is that, I was taught early on, if you want to have a storybook life, you do 2 things and you do them well. Number 1, you always have a new guy you're on this journey with. Always have a new guy you're on this journey with. Number 2, you got to go somewhere once a week you don't want to end up. So I've been doing those 2 things very religiously since 1990. And I can just tell you that's shaped my life on who I am and how I operate and what I do and who I hang around and where I go, etc. So it's just that commitment of love and service that I'm going to live for something other than myself. And that's what gets me excited today. So if I have to summarize this whole evening, what AA has handed me is this 4 principled way of life. Number 1, live a life of humility. Number 2, live a life of other-centeredness. Number 3, live a life of self-sacrificial love. And number 4, go out and learn to love everybody, including the people you don't like. And that's what AA gave me, and that's how I wake up every day, and it's an amazing way to live. And I'm forever grateful that I got it, and I found it right here in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So thank you. Great question.
Thank you, Harold, and thank you, Allison. Beautiful way to end the Q&A, and I'll pass it back to my friend, Pat.